Okay, so listen to this. What if one small, quiet decision made not too long ago started a chain reaction so big that it's now shaking up entire American industries, making everyday things more expensive, and revealing problems that nobody even noticed for hiding there? No big news flash. No dramatic political fight. Just one silent move. Almost $18 billion worth of aluminum stopped flowing into the United States and quietly started heading somewhere else. And the fallout from that? Way bigger than anyone saw coming. This isn't really just a story about metal. It's about who holds the power, who controls what, and a system that might be falling apart faster than anyone can fix it. So here's some background. For over 100 years, Americans just assumed one thing: Canadian aluminum would always show up. It was close, it was dependable, and it never caused drama. It kept flowing into the factories building cars, planes, power systems, and military equipment. This wasn't just a business deal between two countries. It was more like a deep dependency. They were neighbors, so everything felt safe. That closeness created a comfort zone. And that comfort zone? It made people lazy about planning ahead. Well, that laziness is now coming back to bite. Because here's the twist: Canada didn't slam any doors. It didn't pick a public fight. It didn't make any loud threats or angry announcements. Instead, it did something way smarter and way more calculated. It simply started walking away, real slow and real quiet. While American decision-makers were busy playing the tariff game and applying pressure, Canadian aluminum producers were already rerouting their supply toward Europe. Not in one big move. Just slowly, steadily, and very deliberately. And Europe? Europe was thrilled to take it. Now at first, you might think, okay, that's just normal business stuff, right? But dig a little deeper and something much bigger starts showing up. This whole shift wasn't happening because there wasn't enough aluminum in the world. It was happening because nobody trusted the situation anymore. When tariffs kept hitting Canadian aluminum and trade rules kept changing, American manufacturers were left trying to run their businesses in total chaos. Those long, stable contracts that factories depend on for planning? Gone. In their place came short deals, sky-high insurance costs, and expensive backup plans just to manage the risk. Even before things got really bad, people inside the industry were already estimating that all this instability had pushed aluminum buying costs up somewhere between 12 and 18%. Not because the metal disappeared, just because nobody could predict anything anymore. And when businesses can't predict, everything gets more expensive fast. And that instability didn't just stay in one corner. It spread like a ripple through a pond. Car makers, airplane builders, infrastructure companies, they all started absorbing those higher costs. Within just 1 year, that added over $25 billion in extra expenses across American industry. And the important thing to notice? Canada felt none of that pain. While Americans were scrambling, Canada was calmly redirecting its aluminum toward buyers who offered something America couldn't anymore: stability and certainty. Here's where Europe's rulebook totally changed the game. Europe has this system where trade is tied to how much carbon pollution a product creates. If your aluminum is made cleanly with low emissions, you dodge massive penalties. Those penalties can hit hundreds of dollars per ton for dirty producers. Canada makes most of its aluminum using hydropower, clean, green electricity from water. So suddenly, Canadian aluminum wasn't just regular aluminum anymore. It became premium, top-shelf, high-value product. Something that used to be just a normal supply deal turned into a serious strategic advantage. European buyers didn't waste time. Big industrial countries like Germany and France, plus companies all across the European Union, started locking in long multi-year contracts with Canadian suppliers. These weren't short little test runs. These were serious long-term commitments, setting up stable supply chains that would last well into the future. By the middle of 2025, almost a quarter of all new Canadian aluminum contracts were going straight to European buyers. And Europe was absolutely loving every second of it. Not only because of the clean energy angle, but because in a world full of trade drama and unpredictability, having a rock-solid, reliable supply became one of the most precious things money could buy. Back in America, though, the damage was quietly piling up. Factories downstream started reporting delays, climbing costs, and profits getting squeezed thinner and thinner. Big construction and infrastructure projects started going over budget. Deadlines started slipping. Government assessments were already quietly admitting that aluminum-related inflation was starting to mess with everything from upgrading the power grid to buying equipment for national defense. And yet, there was no big dramatic blow-up making headlines every day. Canada hadn't picked a fight. It had simply moved itself out of the chaos and planted itself somewhere more stable. Smart, right? And what makes all of this even scarier is that aluminum is just the first crack showing up in the wall. The exact same pattern is now creeping into other critical materials: steel, cement, fertilizers, energy inputs. These are the basic building blocks that modern economies literally cannot function without. If this same game plays out across those sectors too, the consequences won't just be costly. They could become a full system-wide crisis. Because once supply chains start reorganizing at this scale, turning them back around becomes incredibly hard. Contracts get locked in for years. Infrastructure gets built pointing in the new direction. Money follows stability. And the longer America keeps operating under unpredictable conditions, the faster those shifts keep accelerating. By the second half of 2025, this wasn't just showing up in trade papers or industry meetings anymore. It was landing in real, everyday life across the United States. Quietly at first, then more and more visibly, costs kept stacking up, delays kept stretching longer, and the pressure kept spreading through the whole system. The total extra costs tied to aluminum supply chaos crossed $45 billion. And again, not because the world ran low on aluminum, simply because predictability had vanished. When manufacturers can't count on stable supply, every single decision becomes pricier. Every contract carries extra risk. Every project lives under a cloud of uncertainty. The first place regular people started noticing was in the prices of everyday things. Aluminum is literally everywhere: cars, kitchen appliances, housing materials, electrical wires, food packaging. When its cost jumps, those increases travel outward through everything. Manufacturers either eat the losses or pass them along to customers. Usually they do a bit of both. Analysts studying the effects estimated that aluminum instability alone added somewhere between 0.3 and 0.6 percentage points to overall inflation during that year. That might sound tiny, but across a massive economy, it turns into very real pressure on regular families, pricier cars, more expensive home fixes, higher utility bills, delayed improvements to roads and services that people rely on every single day. At the same time, uncertainty started quietly messing with jobs, not through sudden mass layoffs, but through hesitation and freezing up. Companies put expansion plans on hold. Hiring slowed down. Investment decisions got pushed back indefinitely. When a business has no idea what its costs will look like 6 months or 2 years from now, it stops taking risks. Industry groups started warning that this stretched-out uncertainty could put somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 jobs in danger, not because businesses were going bankrupt, but because growth just stopped moving forward. New factories that should have been built weren't. Old ones that needed upgrades didn't get them. Workers who would have been hired simply weren't called in. Government money also started feeling the squeeze. Infrastructure programs at both the federal and state level started reporting that rising metals costs were wrecking their budgets. Projects that were designed with a set amount of funding suddenly needed significantly more money just to get finished. And these weren't luxury projects anyone could just cancel. These were critical upgrades to power systems, transportation networks, and public utilities that communities depend on. Power grid upgrades were hit especially hard. Aluminum is a core material in power transmission lines and systems. As costs went up and supply got shakier, timelines started slipping badly. Projects meant to make the electrical grid stronger and more reliable got delayed, sometimes pushed back with no clear new date at all. And then there's the national security angle. Aluminum alloys are absolutely essential for military hardware, aircraft frames, Navy ships, armored vehicles, missile systems. When the supply gets unreliable, defense planning turns into a headache. Contractors quietly started adjusting their timelines, building in higher costs and less predictable delivery windows. Industry estimates suggested that this disruption quietly shrunk effective defense purchasing power by several percentage points within a single year. That might not sound dramatic on paper, but strategically, even small shrinkages force really uncomfortable choices between readiness, cost, and how much equipment you can actually produce. Meanwhile, Canada sat comfortably outside all of this mess. It had already spread its exports across different markets. Europe had already locked down long-term supply agreements. All those costs piling up in America? They weren't shared. They were concentrated entirely on the American side. And Europe just kept on benefiting stable contracts, predictable pricing, cleaner supply chains. In a world being shaped more and more by environmental rules and supply chain risk, those advantages don't just sit still. They grow and compound over time. What makes this phase especially dangerous is that it marks a real turning point. The effects aren't theoretical anymore. They're measurable. They're visible. And they're spreading because aluminum isn't some unique special case. It's just the first material where all of these forces fully played out in the open. The exact same pressures, trade unpredictability, carbon-based regulations, and the desperate hunt for stability are now starting to reshape other industries. Steel, cement, fertilizers, and energy-heavy manufacturing are all heading down the same road. And as those sectors hit the same tipping point, the scale of damage will grow exponentially. Because those industries are bigger, more complex, and even more deeply woven into how the global economy actually works. By early 2026, what had started as a trade adjustment had ripped open something much deeper, a fundamental structural weakness in how the United States operates in global trade. The belief that tariffs could control the outcome started falling apart. Because real control doesn't come from applying pressure. It comes from having influence. And influence depends on being central to how the whole system works. That centrality had been slowly slipping away for a while. For more than 10 years, domestic aluminum production inside the United States had been quietly declining. Since the mid-2010s, smelting capacity dropped by roughly 15%. At the time, that didn't feel critical because imports, especially from Canada, were always there to fill the gap. But as trade got more unpredictable, that dependency turned into a serious vulnerability. And rebuilding domestic production isn't something you do over a weekend. It takes massive investment, many years of work, and reliable access to affordable clean energy. Industry estimates say it could take more than a decade and tens of billions of dollars just to get back to where things were. And even then, nobody can guarantee it would actually work. Canada saw this imbalance clearly. Europe moved in to take advantage of it. While the United States was focused on tariffs, Europe was focused on building solid, clear, long-lasting rules. Carbon pricing frameworks were announced years ahead of time. Enforcement schedules were locked in. Access to European markets got tied to emissions performance rather than to political relationships. For manufacturers and suppliers around the world, this removed one of the scariest things in global trade, not knowing what the rules will be next year. As a result, European buyers moved fast and decisively. By late 2025, they had secured long-term contracts covering a huge chunk of Canada's aluminum export capacity. Germany, in particular, became a major destination, rapidly pulling in more Canadian aluminum to support its own industrial transformation. Canada didn't need to be aggressive or powerful to make this happen. It simply aligned itself with the system that rewarded stability and got rewarded in return. For Europe, the benefits were immediate and deeply strategic. It cut dependence on high-pollution suppliers. It locked in stable industrial costs. And it pulled critical supply chains into its own regulatory world. Over time, that creates real influence because more and more of the system starts revolving around Europe's rules. The United States experienced the exact opposite effect. Tariffs didn't bring production back home. Instead, they sped up the move away from American markets. And once contracts shifted over to Europe, pulling them back became nearly impossible. This directly hit infrastructure and defense planning. As supply options got narrower, decision makers were stuck choosing between bad options, pay more, wait longer, or accept less resilience. None of those fit any long-term strategic plan. But maybe even more damaging than the dollars and delays was the shift in how America was seen by the rest of the world. Global supply chain managers started quietly labeling the United States as an unreliable partner. Policy swings, short-term contracts, and the constant threat of sudden new tariffs replaced what used to be America's big advantages: being close, being big, and being dependable. Canada, on the other hand, gained a reputation for reliability by aligning with systems that made sense long-term. Stability became its brand, its competitive edge. This wasn't a defeat caused by someone attacking America. It was a defeat caused by a miscalculation, the mistaken belief that allies would just stay dependent no matter how chaotic things got. When other options appeared, they adapted. They moved. And that's what makes the next part so unsettling. Aluminum isn't where this story ends. It's just where it started. The same regulatory logic is now spreading into other sectors. Steel, cement, fertilizers, and energy-heavy manufacturing are all being pushed through the same transformation by the same forces. As those industries cross the same threshold, the gap in leverage will get wider. The scale of disruption will grow dramatically. Because those sectors are larger, more complex, and buried even deeper in the roots of the global economy. What's unfolding here isn't just a shift in where goods get shipped. It's a shift in who actually holds power in the global system. By the start of 2026, it became unmistakably clear this was not a temporary blip. This was a structural realignment, and it was one the United States was not fully ready to handle. The global economy is moving toward trade rules built around carbon, and those rules are rewriting the rules of competitiveness in ways that tariffs simply cannot fight. Long-term projections paint a serious picture. If current trends keep going, the United States could be locked into cost disadvantages across multiple industrial sectors for years, maybe many years. Aluminum was just the first exposure point. Other materials like steel, cement, fertilizers, and chemicals show similar vulnerabilities when measured against the new carbon-based standards rising across global markets. Estimates suggest that more than 40% of American heavy industrial exports could struggle to stay competitive in markets using carbon border systems by the end of this decade. That's not a small side issue. That's a deep structural problem. Canada enters this new era with built-in advantages that didn't happen by accident. Hydroelectric power, cleaner industrial processes, and early positioning within carbon accounting systems all make it a preferred supplier. Forecasts suggest that by the early 2030s, more than 60% of Canadian industrial exports could qualify for low-carbon trade preferences. That gap is significant, and it carries very real financial weight. Persistent cost disadvantages lead to lower investment coming in, slower economic growth, and declining productivity. Over time, that compounds into something massive. Even conservative estimates suggest this could shave 1 to 1.5 percentage points off annual economic growth. Stretched over a decade, that translates into trillions of dollars in lost output. Money is already following this story. Investors are already flowing toward regions that fit into the future trade frameworks being built right now. Canada is pulling in serious investment into clean industrial assets. The United States, stuck in uncertainty, is watching some of that investment slow down or redirect elsewhere. The strategic picture is just as serious. Trade leverage comes from being at the center of supply chains. As those chains reorganize, influence moves with them. Tariffs stop working when the people you're pressuring no longer need you. Pressure fails when alternatives exist, and people have already taken them. Europe has come out of all this as the quiet winner of the whole transformation. By holding firm to consistent rules, it reshaped global trade flows without starting a single aggressive confrontation. Playing by the rules became the pathway to gaining influence. And that influence translated into real control over supply chains that matter. For the United States, the path forward is getting narrower. Real adaptation here isn't just about slapping on more tariffs. It means building long-term policy stability, investing in cleaner production, and doing the hard work of rebuilding trust in trade relationships. The longer those steps get delayed, the steeper the climb becomes. And timing here really is everything. Supply chains, once they're restructured, don't flip back easily. Contracts signed today shape decisions for years down the road. Infrastructure built to serve one market doesn't easily pivot to serve another. The window to make meaningful adjustments is shrinking. And that leads to the biggest question hanging over all of this. If aluminum was only the opening act, what happens when the next wave hits at full force? When steel, energy, and agriculture are fully folded into carbon-based trade systems, the impact won't be quiet or slow or hidden in trade reports. It will be visible, immediate, and far, far harder to get ahead of. What this whole story reveals, underneath all the numbers and trade statistics, is a fundamental shift in how global economic power actually works in the modern world. Not through confrontation or aggression, through adaptation. Canada didn't escalate. It adjusted faster. Europe didn't dominate by force. It built a system that others voluntarily chose to join. Predictability became the most valuable currency in global trade, and the ones offering it are the ones gaining influence. The United States now faces a defining moment, and the costs of standing still are already showing up in higher prices, delayed projects, and shrinking options. The longer the response takes, the deeper those costs will run. This is no longer a question of whether the shift is happening. It's a question of how fast it will accelerate and whether there's still a real window to respond before the next wave moves completely out of reach. And when that next wave finally arrives, it absolutely will not be silent.